Hi everyone, thank you guys so much for joining us. I'm Salvador Rodriguez. I'm a tech reporter over in the San Francisco Bureau of Inc. magazine. And I have here with me all these wonderful characters. Nancy Lee, she is the Vice President of People Operations at Google. We have David King, the Director of Diversity and Belonging at Airbnb. Jarvis Sam, formerly Snapchats, now Snap, lead recruiter for diversity and inclusion. And then Darrell Jones III, Head of Business Development at Clef. Thank you guys so much for being here to chat with me. And as you guys all know, when it comes to the topic of diversity and inclusion, usually, especially in the media, the focus tends to be on diversity. And that is more so about recruiting people and getting these individuals into the companies. But something that often gets behind or maybe not as much attention is the inclusion aspect. And that is about, retaining these people and ensuring that they can advance their careers within these companies. So thank you guys for coming to talk with me about this today. And why don't we just go down the line and perhaps maybe you guys can kind of list what inclusion means at your respective companies.
Sure. So at Google, I think you're absolutely right. When people think about diversity and inclusion, diversity is the numbers side of it. It's the representation. And the way we think about inclusion is really just the other side of that representation. It's how do you leverage the diversity that you bring into your company for the benefit of your products, for your workforce, for your culture. And if you're not really tapping that talent by, as you said, cultivating their careers, making sure they feel that it's a place that they can foster their careers and grow, that I think you're missing the actual value add of having the diversity in the first place.
And David, how about you? I know in our pre-chat you mentioned that at Airbnb it's very much about not just an inclusion within the company, but within your community as well, right?
Yeah. I'm glad you brought that up, Salvador. For us, our mission is actually belong anywhere, right? So belonging sounds like inclusion. So as you mentioned, the platform, we want to make sure that if you are a guest on the platform or even a host, that you feel like you belong. Right, so not only the platform itself, but host acquisition. We want to bring people to the company, right? And we can go back to the workforce piece. Of course, that's important, right? Bringing folks into the organization that's primary. But if they don't feel like they belong, they're not going to stay, right? So we want to make sure that internally and externally, that we're authentic about the way that we want you to be a part of our fabric. We want you to stay a part of our fabric.
Got it. Jarvis, what's going on with inclusion down in SoCal?
Absolutely. So down in Silicon Beach, we basically divide inclusion into 3 key verticals. It's basic human nature that everyone wants to be developed, be appreciated, and of course be advocated for. As a result, we're able to leverage this both in the community space with the communities that we work with writ large and within our workforce. Ideally, the ideas of diversity and inclusion for us are not in any way mutually exclusive, but rather when viewed writ large, the idea of inclusion is the collectively exhaustive approach for how we engage and embrace and utilize not only the product, but our workforce and the people on the ground to help truly leverage the idea of inclusion.
Got it. And then Darrell, over at Clef, I know you guys have this whole playbook for diversity and inclusion. What can you tell us about that?
Yeah, so starting off, one of our founding values is actually fight the default of exclusion, based in the recognition that the ecosystem that we inherited is systemically kind of oppressive. And so with that in mind, inclusion for us is a continual process of working to empower each employee in this collective enterprise that we have working together. So it's this continual, gradual evolution, which I'll talk about in our handbook later, but that's what it is for us.
Perfect. So one thing that I really wanted to hear from you guys about is just how you make sure that you can have inclusion at your companies, especially because each of your companies at our various stages of their lives, right? Darrell, you guys are still very much a startup. Jarvis and David, you guys are going through some hyper growth, maybe IPO soon. And then Nancy at Google, you guys have tens of thousands of employees. So let's start with Darrell and tell me about what are the challenges that you face with the size of your company and inclusion at this point?
Yeah, so usually at this size, everybody is focused on technical, progressive enhancement, always constantly shipping and improving it. But we wanted to make sure that starting out, we also focused on cultural progressive enhancement. So while there are challenges faced with shipping product, we also built in at the core a handbook that pretty much guides all of our actions and principles around diversity and inclusion, that's open sourced, that allows us to continually work on more and more aspects of diversity and inclusion, regardless of how pressing our hiring requirements may be or how stressed we are for funding or anything like that. We constantly go back to this handbook, and so in the midst of all these challenges, it becomes a living document that we hold ourselves accountable to, that the community also helps us improve on.
And you said that that's something that's open source, so any startups out there that want to get started with their own diversity and inclusion, that's something that they could borrow?
Absolutely. It's on GitHub. It's been forked over 300 times, actually. So we did a bunch of research, worked with diversity and inclusion consultants and attorneys, and our CEO really put in yeoman's work to find out the best practices, bring them together, package them up, so that right out the book, regardless of what challenges you face starting up your company, you can have this baseline template of diversity and inclusion at the foundation level that's higher than the industry norm.
Perfect, perfect. And then Jarvis and David, when your companies are going through such hypergrowth, how does one make time for inclusion?
Yeah, that's a great question. So maintaining consistency in anything is always difficult in hypergrowth. In a world where you're seeing a company's workforce and populace grow anywhere from 2 to 3x over a matter of 10 to 12 months, there's always that big question there. For us in particular, though, establishing infrastructure both programmatically and then with the developmental workforce has allowed us to be really successful in this space, particularly through the introduction of diversity resource groups. That way, when new employees come in and are actually going through orientation, they understand that this infrastructure does exist. It's ones that are built around pillars of the idea of community service and engagement, advocacy for individuals, as well as personal and professional development. For many, the disconnect of being down in LA as opposed to in the true traditional Silicon Valley often presents its own unique attributes. However, the city of Los Angeles as a whole, being diverse in its own right, also enables us a unique opportunity to continue to foster inclusion in that regard. That way that the company can maintain at least that semblance of infrastructure and development and improve upon that over time.
Got it.
Yeah, Salvador, we pause and pivot when need be. So multiple times a year, we're looking at our workforce, surveying our workforce through Murmur to find out what are people thinking, how are employees feeling. And if we find out that there are some deficiencies, we're going to make sure we address those accordingly. So ideally, that will scale to 3,000 person company, 6,000, 75,000. But we're also doing the same thing with our platform. Talking to the hosts, talking to the guests. How do you feel? Do you feel like you belong? If you don't, we will pause, we will pivot, we will bring resources together to address the lack of inclusion. So ideally, albeit tough, that 3,000 person company, we can scale those efforts throughout.
Mm-hmm. Got it, got it. And then how about you, Nancy?
Yeah.
Quite the challenge.
Big challenge in as big of a company as we are, and frankly with as big of a geographic footprint as we have, because that means that what diversity and inclusion means here is very different than what it means in a lot of our international locations. So it becomes an increasingly complex challenge for us to actually figure out what we're going to focus on and what the ideal state is when it comes to how we look. The benefit that we have at being a large organization is that we can bring to bear quite a few resources, which is incredibly helpful. We also, as others have said, our employee resource groups become a tremendous, tremendous asset because there is enough critical mass amongst many, many different groups, and they're very grassroots, so all kinds of different communities come together and come up with ideas and solutions and efforts and initiatives to advance a diversity agenda. So we end up being able to harness not only the power of those of us who have this as our full-time job, but a number of other Googlers who can really help advance the strategy. So,
got it. And so in my coverage of the tech industry, one of the things that's always fascinated me a little bit more when it comes to inclusion is programs that are put in place specifically to help people from underrepresented groups continue to grow their careers within tech and more specifically within your companies. What can you guys tell us about some of the programs that perhaps you guys have in place at your companies that fit that bill?
Yeah, Google's another good example of where our employee resource groups have played really a critical and pivotal role in developing some of those programs alongside with the human resources department, but across a number of different demographic groups and levels, right? Because there's the very entry-level Googler who's just starting out their career and figuring out how to navigate a corporate environment, although we like to think that we're post-corporate. But of course, we're a company. And to all the way to the leaders who need to have a different set of skills at that later stage in their career. So we have many programs that are focused on the unique set of skills that are needed depending on where you are. And like I said, I think we have a constant feedback loop with the communities themselves who are helping us identify what they need most to design and build the most effective programs for them.
Got it. David?
Yeah, I second the need for and the importance of ERGs. I came on board about 8 months ago, and we had 7 affinity groups, as we call them at Airbnb, and now today we have 13, right? So employees now across the spectrum, race, national origin, sexual orientation, veteran status, et cetera, have come together to really help to champion for belonging for folks of their affinity and also allies. But externally speaking, we also have a new program called Airbnb Connect, where we're looking to go out to communities like such, having individuals who are underserved, underrepresented, apply to Airbnb for a program that's specifically for those communities in engineering and data science. And then once they get on board, it's our job as an organization to make sure they are included in the fabric of the organization through a 6-month fellowship. They get the requisite training and ideally are retained at the end of the day.
Got it. Jarvis, what can you tell us?
Yeah, so the solo talk actually just before the last one brought up a very unique point for us in particular, knowing that the United States military in and of itself actually provides a greater diversity than that of the larger function of the US populace overall. And so one program that comes to mind for me in particular is SNAP recently launched a 6-month military diversity fellowship. And so working across various verticals from core engineering to IT, talent acquisition, and even HR, SNAP will be hosting in excess of 10 plus military veterans over the course of the next 6 months through an integrated model, recognizing the core competency and skill set that people bring from the military and understanding how that better aligns to a lot of the programs that we're building at the tech company. Put simply, for a lot of military veterans, their understanding for how their skill set would fit into traditional tech, or even more, a company like Snap, is not always clear. This program is providing them the opportunity to not only see that as an opportunity that they can exercise, but also introducing our workforce in our current community to the ideas of inclusion as it relates to a group that is constantly being pressured by the intersectionality of being not only their traditional demographic, but also a military veteran.
Got it. And then Darrell, what can you tell us?
Yeah, so while most startups attract a bunch of employees with great perks, I mean, I heard about all the great snacks and all these other things, we do our best to ensure that we're leading with a growth orientation when we're attracting employees. And so with that in mind, with our limited resources, instead of spending them on a pool table or a ping pong table, regardless of how fun they may be, we put that towards a continual professional development and learning stipend that I think is fairly uncommon for seed stage startups like ourselves. In addition to that, we have a concerted effort from the top to make sure that each employee is paired up with at least one mentor who can continually coach them from outside of the organization, understanding that as a small, young company, we lack the internal capacity to coach one another up, but that doesn't do away with our need of that. And the third component of continual development is not just with the skill development, it's with the social orientation and grounding. And what I mean by that is, if you want to go to a rally, you can take off work and go to a rally. If you want to go to a protest, if you want to go to a sit-in, I knew I needed to join this company when one of our co-founders was like, yeah, I was at the protest and got shot by a rubber bullet, and our CPO almost got arrested, but it was totally worth it. And if anyone wants to do that, take off work and go protest. And my buddy and I, we were like, oh yeah, we're gonna go shut down 880 tonight. You all right? He's like, yeah, just be safe, just be safe. So it's a holistic, progressive enhancement that we try and cultivate instead of the flashy, fun things.
Great. And so, of course, another part of inclusion has to do with ensuring that the employees aren't just at the company, but that they have a voice within these companies. That's been a topic that I've been covering a little bit, with the rise of products like Slack and Facebook for work or whatever. But what do you guys do at your specific or with your companies to ensure that individuals of all backgrounds have a say and that their voice will be heard? Nancy, what can you tell us?
Yeah, we've, and continue to sort of to highlight the importance of the employee resource groups, which are, I would argue, are very empowered at Google. They, for example, help put together symposiums, convenings. Also, we have something called TGIF, which some of you have probably heard of, where our founders get up every Thursday, it turns out, to hold kind of an all hands with the company. They've been doing that since they were working out of a garage, and we still maintain that as part of our culture. And it allows any Googler to get up and ask questions, and we showcase products. But we've used that forum actually this year in particular for a number of really important communities. So for example, for Black History Month, we actually had a fully dedicated TGIF, which was put together by our Black Googler network in connection with our communications teams to give them that forum. We actually had Brian Stevenson come in and give the keynote for it. And we've done the same, obviously, for Hispanic Heritage Month. We've had a similar thing for Pride with the LGBT community. So we are opening up what are normally the kind of forums that are for product launches or showcasing our business to these communities to give them voice. And again, the ERGs themselves have executive sponsors and are regularly in a dialogue with leadership and with folks on my team to make sure that we hear what their needs are.
Got it. And then, David, with Airbnb specifically, how do you guys give voice, especially after this year for you guys have been tackling some of the racism that some of the hosts and the guests experience. So how do the Black employees at Airbnb, how do they get voice so as to avoid some of those issues in the future?
Yeah. We, after some of the issues that you pointed out, we created an anti-discrimination team made of people across the entire organization. We're talking engineers, product design, public policy. A lot of the folks are right here in the audience. They were line employees across the entire organization who had a skill set and an interest in making a difference. So now instead of having people just kind of randomly placed throughout the organization, coming in on a product, working and leaving, it's now a permanent team of individuals across every level throughout Airbnb who not only have a vested interest, but also have a professional expertise helping us to address those issues. Without that, I don't think we could affect change.
Got it. And then Jarvis at Snap, this year we also saw, black face with a filter and then yellow face with another filter. So how do you ensure that, your Asian employees, your Black employees, they can also stand up and say, hey, this is not a good idea?
Cross-functional engagement here is critical, so having people across not only various levels from executive to general individual contributor, but also highlighting the intersection that exists between these groups. So within our diversity resource groups, for example, seeing the Lady Chillas, our women at Snapchat organization, and then Snap Noir, the Black Snapchat network, get together and collectively highlight some shared practices, shared challenges, shared principles, has allowed us to be really effective. That, in addition to launching a lens review committee that actually takes on a more culturally aware approach to how we choose to engage the product development, is also crucial. For us in particular, we understand that our community engagement and understanding where the product fits in that space is crucial. And so if you take a look, for example, post the Orlando shootings, we ran an amazing filter that allowed for you to change your entire profile of the snap that you took to a rainbow, highlighting inclusion on that front as well. And then recent live stories featured on Ramadan. We're taking concerted efforts to understand the idea of cultural awareness and cultural engagement, and then being able to leverage our platform as a tool of communication and as a camera company to leverage that effectively.
Got it. Darrell, what can you tell us?
So we broach employee empowerment at the foundation level of our policy handbook. And because it is an open source living document, structurally speaking, anybody can make a pull request and submit a supposed change, all right? And so this means that anybody, not just folks that were early on or anything like that, can make a change, but anybody coming on can say, hey, what do we think about this particular policy around vacations? Make a change that is then reviewed by everyone in the team, and we'll analyze research and arguments for and against, and then kind of move forward. So it really, for us, is at that living, inclusive policy level that we're able to permit everyone to feel like they can change some component of our culture.
Got it. Now, one thing that I think, from the outside, we never really know what you guys are up to in the diversity, parts of your company. So, tell us specifically, what's maybe your pet project right now that you're working on when it comes to inclusion? What's been the thing that you've been really motivated and driven to tackle? Darrell, let's start with you.
So, there are a few things on that front. We do a lot of things as a company. We've got a bunch of different people doing a bunch of different things. So from a company level, we have a bedrock foundation of our monthly community dinner. This is a space where anybody from the Oakland community can join us for dinner, touch base, get to know one another, things like that. And that's a wonderful way for us to leverage the community to build those ties within inside to make sure that we're kind of bringing out the best of both worlds. So that's one thing. Another thing that we've participated in is helping contribute to creating the Tech Equity Collaborative, which is a organization in Oakland that's attempting to create a more inclusive, community-oriented, and representative tech ecosystem throughout the East Bay. So that's something that we participate in. Of course, we have the living document that's there, and we've recently started up really trying to recruit from local colleges, so Peralta and things like that. But that's only things I'm aware of. Some of my coworkers are working on Good for POC. I know B is up to all types of things. Each person, we do Women Who Codes every 2 weeks, Tuesday night. There are just so many different things going on. It's hard for me to wrap my mind around it, really.
Awesome. Well, and I can personally vouch for the dinners. They're pretty awesome. Jarvis, what's been your your project you've been focused on?
Yeah, so writ large nationally, we work with a lot of the traditional organizations, Girls in Tech, Women Who Code, et cetera. But the key focus for me right now is actually a local project that we're working on. So we work with a group in LA called the Big Soul Exchange. And so one of their big projects is we see a significant amount of diversity that exists at the high school layer and even more significantly, at the community college layer. Now, the way we evaluate talent acquisition at Snap is when we're integrating the idea of diversity, that includes all levels, not just highlighting diverse candidates that are at top tier universities, but rather really figuring out how we can take a more deep dive approach to fostering diversity of perspective and thought at all levels. So we recently launched a program in partnership with the Big Soul Exchange where we're actually hosting 4 community college students within our IT group, teaching them all of the perspectives of IT operations, network engineering, systems engineering. That way it's more than just the background of building out an associate's program for them, but rather giving them the real-time experience that can later be parlayed into a unique opportunity either at Snap in a full-time capacity or working at another traditional tech company, actually leveraging their newly found skills in the information technology space.
Cool. David?
A couple of things come to mind. Number one would be supplier diversity. We're building a program from scratch. As an organization, we have $1 billion in annual spend. We want to make sure that spend gets to some underserved communities. Quickly, host acquisition. We want to make sure that we have a diverse set of hosts on our platform, and that the hosts understand the economic lift they can get from being a host on Airbnb's platform. But the one thing I really want to mention that's my pet project is working with the community of people with disabilities. So in my past lives, it's worked on the East Coast, and quite often disability was a part of the diversity conversation. And I haven't heard it as much here. And I want to make sure that we collectively look at diversity and we are inclusive of all diverse constructs. And I want to make it my own task, working with people internally and externally, to make sure that people with intellectual developmental disabilities are really a part of the conversation, not just an outlier.
Great. Nancy, what's been your project?
There's so many that I could just sit up here and go on and on about how many exciting things we're working on it that I'm really, really jazzed about. But I'll just share a couple. One is that I think we have gotten to a point at Google where there is some really foundational awareness about the importance of diversity and inclusion, and that has permitted us to launch a project where we're really trying to get diversity and inclusion, not just in terms of hiring and representation and people, but into our product strategy, meaning that we need our product strategies to incorporate a diversity lens, so they are not only responsive to diverse communities, but they are hearing directly and incorporating feedback for the needs that those communities have, so that all of the diverse perspectives are brought to bear very early stage in product development. So that's an incredibly exciting thing that I think we have been working on. The other one that I think is absolutely essential and critical and incredibly hard is to just, in a very honest way, introduce the conversation of race into your workforce. Race has long been a conversation that we have thought of as off limits in the workplace, and I think that both the political climate that we're in right now, as well as the events that we've all seen this year, lay bare the fact that unless we have an honest conversation about race in America, then we are never going to solve the challenges that, frankly, have been deeply entrenched for much too long. So I think Google has always prided itself as a values-driven company company, as a forward-thinking company, and we want to push the envelope and turn up the heat and have a very, again, honest conversation about race relations.
Well, that's a great segue into my next question. And then after this, we'll open up the microphone to you guys, so you guys can also weigh in with your questions. But you mentioned, opening up the conversations of race, and that's something that we recently saw from the chairman and CEO of AT&T, Randall Stephenson. He gave a great talk last month. And so the question for me now is, how important is it to have buy-in like that from the top of your companies when it comes to really truly creating an inclusive workplace at your respective companies? So tell us about that. Like, how important is that?
Sir, I'll go because it's absolutely critical in our company. I think it's really important to have that senior level, that sort of tone at the top getting set, because our Googlers are looking to leadership to see what the boundaries of conduct and that communication sort of guide rails are, right? It's also important because it is not going to be comfortable to have these conversations, right? And unless you have sort of air cover at the top saying, we understand that some people are going to made to feel defensive. They are going to literally be asked to challenge to some of the assumptions and the beliefs and the attitudes that have become are a function of the way they've been raised, the family they're in, maybe the privilege that they have experienced. Those are very, very hard things to tackle. And unless I think we have that very senior buy-in, which I am confident we do at Google, I don't think you can really push the envelope the way it needs to on this topic.
Well, I feel like there might be, because I saw right before we came on stage on Twitter, apparently Sundar spoke in Spanish very briefly during the earnings call today, so that's exciting. But David, what can you tell us about buy-in from the top?
I echo everything that's already been said, and I will add to that, especially at the CEO level, you need to hear it, of course. The board needs to talk about diversity. Leadership throughout the organization, however defined, need to talk about diversity, and it needs to be authentic. If it's not, people understand, they know it's not authentic when it's not. But importantly is creating a culture where you can have those conversations and feel safe having them. You should be able to mess up. We don't all know all the answers, and we all have different opinions. And if you feel like, I don't want to talk about race because I feel like I'm going to be, thrown into a corner by somebody who might disagree with me, that's a problem. So creating a safe space to have the conversations from the top down.
Jarvis?
Yes, I would argue it's absolutely critical. I think it's interesting that we talk about AT&T. One of the interesting functions about working in the tech industry is we like to take a very introspective approach and positing the significance of a flat hierarchical structure. But if we can learn anything from consumer products companies, telecommunications companies, is that the idea of understanding where executives sit at figureheads on key decisions like diversity and inclusion, that's a critical point to ensuring our success over time and in the future. Understanding that our executives do actually support these initiatives, and not just at a high level or for a media-based level, but are putting significant resources behind it as well. It's something that major companies like Coca-Cola and Delta have demonstrated for years, and that people in the tech industry can really begin to learn from even more.
Great. And then Darrell, I know you guys have buy-in, but how has that been advantageous for you guys?
When our CEO shakes up the normal mode of business by saying he got shot by a rubber bullet protesting, or addressing the company after slaying, or coming up to me and saying, hey, I know this is possibly really hard for you, feel free to take the day. These things, one, they signal to employees within the company and outside of the employee what type of organization you're really trying to be about. Two, it's empowering. When I hear that, when he looks me in the eye, when he says that and we share that, I feel as though I am able to bring my full self to this organization and to share more of me and to push these issues forward because he is giving me that platform. And then three, it's very just reassuring, to know that. And so on all different fronts, it creates a wonderful, virtuous cycle where he's giving something out, we're replicating that, receiving it, and turning it into just great energy, which is, I think, one of the reasons why, as a company, although we're really small, a lot of us are really engaged. I think that leadership there is really important for that.
Awesome. Well, I love hearing the passion from all you guys. But yeah, let's go ahead and open it up to questions right up here.
Hi. So my question is about intra-racial issues. So we talk about the issues between races, but within, say, the black community, issues of shadeism, or, for example, African-born people who come to America versus black people who were born here, and those types of tensions. Are those conversations that you're having? And if so, how are you seeing it play out in your respective companies? And just what are your thoughts in general about that?
And were you guys able to hear that?
There's a lot of echo. Were you able to hear that? Okay.
Go ahead.
Yeah, so I'll start it. It's funny, the conversation of colorism actually came up in a Snap Noir meeting recently. And it's a question, we tend to evaluate a couple of recent articles when we have those meetings with the Black Snapchat Network. And it's definitely a significant point. It's something that we don't necessarily encounter as a company, but it's definitely a conversation worth having within the group. And some of the thoughts and theories that were highlighted there is really taking a conscious approach to understand what is the most inclusive term, phrasing, or rhetoric that can be leveraged there. And so for Snap Noir in particular, it's why we chose that term. The idea of blackness, as opposed to creating a contrived approach to simply using African American or an over-politicized phrasing, doesn't present the most inclusive workplace or environment for us. And so being able to leverage how we evaluate that together is something that Snap Noir is continuing to build within our community as a whole. And then of course, the core function of the group, then sharing those details more broadly, either when we're doing panels like this externally or when speaking internally.
Great. Anyone else? Right here. And please speak up, just because there's a bit of an
echoey.
echo. So.
Okay. My question is for Nancy and David. Recently, Salesforce announced a chief equality officer compared to a chief diversity officer. The focus being on women's issues, the difference in the pay gap and health and all of that. So how is Google or Snapchat or Airbnb addressing these issues about equality? It's diversity, inclusion, and now we've moved on to equality. So how does that factor in?
Yeah, I got the question. It's interesting, the choice of words around equality. I would say that's one sort of tenet of the overall diversity strategy. And one way to think about it is, there are people and the communities that we support, the leadership, and whether they're giving voice to the importance and the values around diversity and inclusion in themselves, not just speaking, which you hear a lot about leaders speaking and giving keynotes and talks, but it's about action, right? It's about behavior change. So it's wonderful when there's a bunch of leaders talking. It's a different thing when they're acting, and we're trying to bridge from awareness to actual attitude and belief shift to actual action. So there's a continuum that I think we need to push leaders into. So people is one piece of it. Obviously, I mentioned the product stuff. Process is how I would sort of define that area of work you're talking about. What is the set of tools that we use, and we use many of them at Google, to constantly evaluate essentially the quality of our systems, whether it's performance management, compensation, our promotion statistics, our hiring statistics, to make sure that all of our processes are working fairly and equitably. And again, there's a lot of rigor that we bring to bear on that in order to ensure that there's an equal and level playing field.
Great, and I think we have about time for one, maybe two questions, so let's go ahead over there.
Hi, it was really great to hear you talking about real honest conversations about race. But one thing I would love to hear is the stress that your companies put on our local communities of color and the impact of gentrification and the displacement of the Bay Area's communities of color as a result of tech employees moving here from other parts of the country and other parts of the world to take advantage of the fantastic career opportunities you offer. What are you doing to make sure that our local diversity, we're the second most diverse region in the whole country, is connected to the opportunities you offer?
Great. Darrell, go ahead.
I'm glad you brought that up, because one of the initiatives that has spun out of our founding value of fight the default of exclusion is me having time to create the organization called the Tech Equity Collaborative, which is explicitly created to orient the tech ecosystem in Oakland towards a more inclusive, community-oriented, and diverse environment. And absolutely.
Go ahead, keep answering, and then we'll hear from you guys as well.
Okay. So we're doing what we can in Oakland as a small nonprofit. We're building out programs as a company cohort to help folks make public commitments to diversity and inclusion, hold them accountable. We're also building out an individual program that you should be hearing about shortly.
Great. And then, yeah, do you guys want to weigh in on that question as well? Like, how much conversation goes around, the impact that your companies have on the local communities?
I think for me, it's working with the local communities, going back to the platform. We do have a platform that can actually provide an economic lift to people in the local communities. And I think that's where our focus is, post-acquisition, making sure people understand that if they are a part of the community, they can actually benefit and not have the conversation focused around gentrification and other issues. That is really the hallmark of some of the efforts we're trying to make in San Francisco, but really have made some strides in New York and Chicago. Talking to the community, educating as to who we are, what we do, and how they can benefit financially, importantly, from what we do.
I'm going to give you a quick two-part answer. One, Code Next. Code Next is a student program that we started in Oakland. We're at Fruitvale Station. You can go Google it. You can read about it. We just launched it formally, and the press is out on it. This is our effort to go and be proximate in that community, to show up and be responsive to a specific need around access to technical curriculum for people of color, for young kids. We're starting at 14 years old. That is something we are deeply invested in partnership with a number of organizations in Oakland. So read about that. The second thing I would mention, second program, Accelerate with Google. This is essentially a kind of boot camp that we provide to small minority and women-owned businesses to help them leverage the tools and the power of the web in order to increase their own economic impact. So yes, there's lots we need to do to bring more people into our workforce, but those are examples of where we can affect the opportunity that kids have to actually become the makers in the next generation, and to help people who are already running their own businesses and trying to build their economic power, to again leverage the power of technology.
Great. Well, thank you guys so much for taking the time to chat about all this stuff. I wish we had more time, but this thing is blinking. But thank you guys for listening. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Salvador.
Thank you.